And we will get started today on the 5th of January, 2026. Um, the fifth day of the first month, that the Quakers would say, because uh, a month named for the Greek god Janus was too pagan for them to tolerate. Um, Um, it was okay to use the 2026 because that was the year of our Lord and their Lord was our Lord. So that was okay. But Janus was not okay. Um, so check in for anybody want to start with saying something about what's going on for them or life or anything before I plunge into the material. Because here we are doing our part in helping humanity wake up to what's we need to save ourselves. Um, going to start with a new discovery. Um, uh, you may recall, if you remember some of the arcana um, in Evolution Diverted, um, a bit about the Great Pyramids of Giza, um, how close observation proves that they could not be built by the humans of that time. The close observation was two things of purely observational, not any of the abstruse occult mathematics of the relationship between the shapes and the geometry, but pure physical measurement. Um, for a mountain, an artificial mountain of stone to exist without crumbling for thousands of years, its base would have to be absolutely level. Any any tilt, even a minute one, for the great structure in time would cause it to fall apart through weather and gravity. Um, and what's been found through close engineering measurement is that, in fact, it's perfectly level from one corner to another, to another, to another. The tolerances are unbelievably close, something that could not be done with the tools that they had, which are basically ropes and knots, you know. They didn't even have primitive optics in order to do that. The other piece of perfection, which is impossible, is the pyramid's alignment with the North Pole, with the north axis of the Earth's rotation. It's absolutely perfect. It's too close to be done even with optical instruments. Okay, um, but if you pay attention to those physical realities, um, you have to accept that it was not built by humans, which to conventional thinking is impossible. So we won't even pay any attention to those facts. Well, here's some new facts, um, and uh, it will these will be incontrovertible proof that the pyramids are not a human construction unless what's necessary to nail down this finding is blocked by the authorities, like it's being blocked by the Egyptian authorities, like it's being blocked in Turkey, where only a small portion uh, of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated, and the Turkish government is making it impossible to view the rest of the ruins. Well, this was published um, December 8th, 2025. I'm not sure exactly how it came to me. I can't keep track of all the feeds that come into my computer. This one was from dailymail.co.uk. Um, a team of scientists um, in March last year um, announced a colossal, I'm quoting from the article, colossal underground complex plunging nearly 3,500 feet beneath the plaza, the plateau of Giza. Um, these are hollow cylinders, enormous cylinders going down 3,500 feet, each one wrapped in a perfect descending spiral. And they end in a vast chamber, bigger than say, a football stadium in terms of volume, a rectangular chamber. Um, it's a radar engineer developed this imaging method. It's not the ground penetrating radar. It's from satellite, and it produces images through tomography. Um, it's a it's called synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography, and it measures microscopic vibrations in the Earth's surface. And from those vibrations, it, kind of mathematically deduces what's below and producing those patterns of vibrations. Um, 8 massive hollow cylinders, each one wrapped in helical coils to cubic chambers 260 by 260 by 260 feet. Um, this is not going to show up very well, but this is what the imagery looks like at first. And these are columns under the underground going down a kilometer. Um, Drawn to the scale of the pyramids, this is what the configuration looks like. Um,
So, Mike, where are you reading this as a summary from the Daily Mail? Is that what you said? Do you have the original? Was this published peer reviewed somewhere?
um,
And I'll tell you why I'm asking.
it's not,
I've
yes, it's
I've
not, it's
I've
not,
been running across this in numerous places that I follow, and it looks to me like the Egyptians are saying it's not real.
well, of course.
Not that I believe them. Don't get me wrong. Not that I believe them, but there is some controversy here about whether
Well,
or not
yes,
what this
yes.
technology can do. So I wondered if it's peer reviewed anywhere.
That I don't know, but one of the challenges was that this is not an accurate methodology, and what this team did, um, they they used it to map an existing underground void, a laboratory under an Italian mountain, and they did the imagery, based on the surface vibrations of the mountainside, and they with total accuracy, were able to locate and diagram the existing underground void.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, the skeptics, of course, say that this is AI hallucinations, and but they did find this laboratory. This article says with 100% accuracy. Um, Now, here's when it gets like methodologically interesting. The shaft, there are shafts um, that go down to the area of these voids at the bottom of these tubes. Okay, and those shafts seem to be something like a service entrance to those voids, but they're filled with centuries of debris. So it'll take the permission of the authorities to clear out those shafts that go all the way down there, 3,000 over 3,000 feet. Um, you know, what do you think the chances are of getting permission to clear out those shafts? You know. because that's something that can be done without having to drill, into these structures, which also they would not get permission to do because it's, you know, too sensitive. Um, so let's see where that's going. Um, and I,
And Mike, just to throw one more piece in there, what I'm coming across is people who believe this story are making the claim that it's thousands of years older than the pyramids, this underground structure.
I don't know how they could come up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, they're saying that the pyramids were built on top of something that's even bigger than they are
Well, that
underground. I mean, that's kind of amazing.
Yeah, although that they would claim that they're a lot older than the pyramids is probably based on misdating of the pyramids. Is probably thinking the pyramids are much younger than they actually are.
Right. I keep coming across stories that make the whole Khufu built the Great Pyramid seem kind of silly.
Yes. Now talking of silly, it's like here's this interesting diptych that we get. At the same time, um, here's this big spread in National Geographic, December 2025. Because somebody came across a diary reporting how stone was quarried on the other side of the Nile and brought across the Nile to build the pyramids. Um, and they just, since the pyramids had to be built by humans, well, wow, we found out a little piece of how they did it. Um, except that if the pyramids were much, much older and built by extraterrestrials, then what this diary is reporting is the quarrying and transport of stone to build the much lesser pyramids all the way up the Nile Valley that were built, in my opinion, in emulation of the great pyramids from ancient times, from then ancient times. Um, so this piece of um, evidence is at best flimsy, you know, um, and um, and much of the thinking is flimsy. I mean, if you look at how the experts, say the pyramids had to have been built, they talk about these massive ramps that were built. If here's the pyramid, and there's this enormous ramp that comes up to the surface of what they're being built. No consideration of how a ramp built of earth could be of that magnitude could be stabilized, and no calculations to show that animal and human force could be great enough to push blocks of stone up a ramp at that angle, simply by rolling them on logs. You know, the amount of force that would take could not be done by muscle, you know, but they don't want to do the engineering, so they never talk to the archaeologists, never talk to the mechanical or structural engineers because they would find out that what they're proposing could not have been done. So they don't ask. Um, but what we keep encountering is the astounding and disheartening ability of humans to avoid and deny what, if accepted and actually faced, would upend too much, would be too distressing, would be uh, too painful, too frightening. What we keep coming back to is not the facts of our unusual origin, but the terror and humiliation and pain, you know, that is carried in the collective unconscious from those times. That's what the block is. It's not really intellectual, it's visceral. Okay. Um, but it's and whether we'll get enough courage, fortitude, I'm not sure what it will take, in order to overcome that profound emotional barrier, who knows? But if we don't, you know, um, we'll we seem to be in the marching in the direction of collective suicide in order to not become conscious of what's we're carrying unconsciously. So, um, on to the next discovery. And unless we want to chew this over a bit more, I'll wait a bit because I know this is a big new piece. Um, okay, the next is a not a new discovery. Um, the artifact was actually first I'm going to tell you about was actually unearthed in 1899 and got seriously restudied in the 1970s um, by a scholar at the University of Chicago. By the way, if you ever find yourself in Chicago, be sure to get to the Oriental Institute, which has a astounding collection of Mesopotamian artifacts. Okay, I'm not talking loud enough, Jim. Thank you. Okay. Anyway, the reason that this, to me, the reason that this artifact is so telling, uh, and this will be a sort of a rather long chain of connections I'm about to start, but I think it points us in the direction of what might be the ultimate and original source of the hatred of the Jews. So it's about the size of a big hand, and it's a clay map. Wasn't originally understood to be a map, but it is. And here's an image of it in National Geographic. So sometimes they're very helpful. Here's what you don't get a terribly great picture of it, but that's what it looks like. Piece of clay with lines inscribed. Nobody knew what it was, really, what it was meant to represent until it was compared with aerial photography of the city of Nippur, the ruins of Nippur, um, in central Mesopotamia. And it was found to be a rather accurate depiction of the ancient walls and the gates through the walls. Um, Now, Nippur was originally uh, called Nibriki. Um, it was a spaceport obliterated by the flood, um, but it was, and Nibriki um, means it has Nibiru or Nibu in it, the planet of the crossing, and Ki is Earth. Ki is the source for the Greek root geo. Um, and the translations that are possible are it's the place of connecting Earth with Nibiru, or it's the crossing point, because Nibriki was from the very beginning um, Enlil's stronghold. It was the source of, I wouldn't say Enlil's power, but the center of his power. Enki's uh, source was in at lower Mesopotamia, near um, the head of the Persian Gulf. Um, Nibriki is further up on the plain of Mesopotamia, and it contained um, a structure that was capped by what was called the Ekur. Um, and what's remarkable about this map, and here's a diagram of what the map shows. Um, here's the diagram, and right where my finger uh, is the Ekur. The Ekur was a place of technology that the tablets say allowed Enlil to view the whole world. And it was the place for the equipment that allowed communication with Nibiru. Um, so that's another meaning of the crossing point, not just a spaceport, but it was the communication link. Um, it's up in the air whether or not the Anunnaki had means of uh, interplanetary communication other than we have, that would, because our means would take a long time for a message to get to Nibiru and a response to come back. Whether they had closer to instantaneous communication like we see in the Star Trek series with their what do they call it, subspace communication links, could be. Anyway, that's where the link was. Um, so it's extremely important place, and the story gets interesting when we look into it because Nibriki, it can't be a coincidence that the name for the Jews in their own language is Ibri. Just a little bit too close, because there's textual evidence, according to Sitchin, and sidebar here, what a shame that his publishers insisted that his books be mass market books, and so they excised all of his citations. So we don't know where is the evidence for this, but Sitchin said that there was textual evidence that Abraham's father, Terah, that family lived in Nibiki and later moved to Ur. We know from Genesis that Terah was a priest of the god of Ur, who was the chief god of Ur, was Enlil. The secondary god was his son Nannar. But he was also obviously the god of his center of power of at Nibriki. So it's like saying if we're the Ibri, it's like me saying I'm a New Yorker. You know, uh, that's where I came from. Um, Gets even more interesting because in oh, let me check what year this was. Um, Hang on, 3760 BCE, on a visit to Earth in Nibriki, the king of Nibiru An promulgated a calendar. And what we know of this calendar, we know a good deal about it, and it is identical with the ancient Hebrew calendar, which the Jews are still using today with almost no change. Um, um, it's a to us it's an unusual calendar. Um, instead of having a leap year every fourth year with an additional day in the calendar to help coordinate the rotation of the Earth with the rotation of the Earth around the sun. In this calendar, in order to accommodate it, because can correct me if I'm wrong, Reeve, but the moons are all 28 days long. In order to do that intercalation, there's a leap month. Every so many years, one of the months is repeated. Okay. Reeve, do you know how many?
Ador Aleph and Ador Beit.
Right. How many years apart does that
I
happen?
think it's 17 or 19, something
Yeah.
like 19 years.
Yeah. So every 17, 18, 19 years, the
Yeah.
calendar has to be reset by repeating one of the months. Okay.
Well,
And that was true then and it's true now.
yeah.
Is the calendar now used for um,
Well, it
um,
went 360 degrees and went and moved to 364 now. It was once 360, right? So that had a lot.
let's not get into that, please.
Oh,
Okay. Right.
okay.
Um, but so here's this linkage um, of the later the children of Israel, Israel being Abraham's grandson, um, with with Mesopotamia, particularly with Enlil. Now, where it gets sticky is, hang on, around the time of the nuclear war, um, Enlil was in political trouble, and there was a rebellion of five kings um, uh, um, in the at the edge of Mesopotamia, around the southern end of the Dead Sea. Five cities, uh, two of whom we know from biblical history, um, Sodom and Gomorrah. And in the in the Mesopotamian texts and the Genesis, there are two different accounts of the same warfare. Okay, um, and Abraham uh, was enlisted, you might say, uh, in the fight on Enlil's side against Enlil's opponents that were more or less aligned with Enki. Um, Now, here's this connection between the patriarch of the Jews, okay, with the God who at times was the outright enemy of mankind, um, and always looked on mankind with derision. He was revolted and disgusted by humanity. Um, so you might say that the Hebrews started out on the wrong side. And this attitude of derision and disgust with humanity, um, this would get me in trouble with certain authorities now. But you don't have to dig too deep into Jewish culture um, to come across this strain of contempt for others, for those who are not in quote the tribe. It's all through Exodus and um, Deuteronomy. Okay, the awful attitude and treatment of the others. Okay, um, and since Enlil was the he's the one who set off the war, the nuclear bombardment in the Sinai and north of the Sinai that devastated Mesopotamian culture. Um, and he was the chief of the gods through the many thousands of years that humankind um, suffered humiliation and fear and traumatization, um, shame of slavery. Um, uh, so you might say that, the Hebrews got guilt by association. They were connected with the oppression of humanity, and it isn't that what pops to the surface when you ask people, what's the source of their hatred? Well, the Jews have too much power, um, and they have knowledge, that's beyond us, and they have power. That's coming right to me. That's coming right out of the depths of um, very painful, unconscious memory. Or another way to put it, it's in the field. Um, so, uh,
Mike, I want to add something to that, kind
yeah,
of.
please.
Well, it's the synchronicity of it. I can't resist. I I had a doctor appointment today in ophthalmology, and it was one of those things where you wind up sitting in a waiting room forever.
Oh, that's the
And
definition of ophthalmology.
I think that may be the definition of ophthalmology. But there was this one person, she was behind me, I couldn't see her, but she was talking to someone else loudly. And she was obviously a fundamentalist Christian who was giving her opinions on all sorts of things. And it got to the point where I actually had to leave the room because it was more than I could take. And I just didn't feel like telling her to shut the fuck up, but I wanted to. But one of the things she said, and she said this, and I thought about this and I thought, wow, is this really happening? Is that she was complaining about the Jews, and what she was complaining about and what she was saying was the problem with the Jews was that they call themselves God's chosen people. So they think they're better. And that sounds to me a lot like what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah.
weird? That was today, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's why, let me put in, that's
Good.
why it's such a movement against retaining Bachar Banu, because it's bloody arrogant. That's what it is. It's putting down everybody else. And so don't be surprised that there's a huge movement, especially the reform and reconstructionist movements, that have a feeling which is being expressed here, that just what you're saying. And I think it is important to know we can't come across as arrogant because people don't like arrogant people. And we've been arrogant for a long, long time. That's the problem. One of the problems.
Mm.
Yeah, and we're also gaming the system. Obviously, the Nobel Prizes are manipulated. That's why so many Jews get them, right?
Of course.
Um, so in the history, um, I'm gonna read one of my chapter notes, or two of my chapter notes, um, from Evolution Diverted. Um, in a recent translation of the Hebrew Bible by Alter, um, Genesis 13 and 14 are a typical biblical collage um, with a narrative that shifts from a depiction of Abraham in a patriarchal role. In other words, the Abraham of we're most familiar with in Genesis, that people pay the most attention to, okay, to one showing him in as a military commander of international significance. Because also in Genesis, he takes cavalry and goes north, and it doesn't say in Genesis, but it says in the tablets that there was he was allied with the forces of Enlil. Um, the the translator explains that we can see in the text the sources of pasted in passages. In other words, pasted in from Mesopotamian literature, pasted into Genesis. Um, that they are different in style, different in language, than the other literary strands from which the book of Genesis is woven. Um, Abraham's allegiance to the chief of the gods of earth, Enlil, okay, supports his existence as an historical figure distinct from the scriptural patriarch, okay, um, because in that role he's member of a prominent family, in the domain of Enlil and a son of God's priest. Um, there are here's the textual hint that I was trying to that I wish I knew the source of from Sitchin's writings, that Abraham was born around 2120 BCE in Nippur, in Nibriki. Okay. Now, by the way, if um, his father worshipped Enlil, the self-deified great figure, okay, um, who did his son Abraham worship? Doesn't matter who Genesis says he worshiped. Just think about it. Who is he likely to have worshiped? Particularly since it's revealed, I think it's in Genesis, I forget where now, or maybe it's a much later book, that he actually had little idols in his tent.
Rachel, that's right.
Right? It was Rachel said he had little idols in his tent.
Yeah.
So um, his visitation from God, from the maker of the universe in human form, that's wonderful storytelling. But think about who he actually was loyal to. Okay? Um, and
So
again,
are you
just
asking that question seriously? And what's the answer? Is it Enki? Is that what you're talking about?
no, Enlil. He had to
It
be.
is Enlil.
It had to be. He had to be a follower of Enlil, and
Why?
Enlil
Why?
was.
I
Oh,
missed why
oh,
it had to be a
oh, I
follower.
didn't. Oh, I'm just. Oh, okay. It's speculation, you know. Um, but Genesis admits that his father worshipped the god of war.
Yeah, so we're saying he probably, and that makes him what? A good guy?
It 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 makes him a good guy in Enlil's view. It makes him a good guy in view of the Enlilites. Um, it makes him
Who are the people who want to destroy humanity? I'm just trying to get all the pieces here.
well at times. There were a few critical times when Enlil was physically hostile to humanity.
It doesn't take too many of those. Yes.
You do that a few times. You try to destroy the species a few times, and
Right.
you're stuck with that. You know, you're stuck with that label. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
hate it when that happens.
yeah, I hate it when they want to kill me. So
Yeah.
so so what my hypothesis here is that from the get-go, the children of Israel were on the wrong side. They were on the side of the enemy of humanity. Um, and that's the source of them being the chosen people.
Ah,
They were politically
yeah,
correct.
yeah, yeah, but they were on the wrong side. Well, I guess the reason that where what I see moving into modern times that I would attribute to the Mesopotamian tale and the the blending of our genes to create the Nephilim, right? And then the Nephilim moved out onto the into the world and
Hold
became
on. The Nephilim are the Anunnaki.
right, but the I guess the story that I have in my head about the past is that the people who were most that had were the offspring of the Anunnaki who bred with humans, right? Weren't those the Nephilim?
No, the Nephilim were those who came down. They were the Anunnaki.
They were the Anunnaki. Then what did we call the people that were produced when the Anunnaki bred with human women?
Right. So first, the human women were the results of the laboratory manipulation of the DNA of Homo erectus, producing
Right,
Homo sapiens sapiens.
right.
Then the next level of hybridization, natural hybridization through breeding, okay, those are called in Genesis, those are the men of renown.
Men of renown.
Those
Okay.
are the generations of figures like Methuselah.
But what has come forward to us is the inbreeding of royal families all around the planet. And that's, I mean, you realize that even Queen Elizabeth had one or two siblings that had to be hidden because their genetics had been so inbred for so long. And my I guess my thinking was the people who consider themselves related to the men of renown are the ones that are breeding so that they keep those genes close to them. I guess, and I don't know if I'm mixing. But the people of Abraham, on the other hand, don't practice inbreeding as far as I can tell. So there's no, so how then are they, why, why do they consider themselves to be God's chosen people? Does that make sense? Is that a reasonable
Yeah, yeah.
question?
Um, the elite, wherever they were, those who are at the top of the social of the scale of esteem and wealth,
Mm-hmm.
were descendants of the quote men of renown, of those who had more Anunnaki genes in them, just through interbreeding. Um, so they are the elite of the world. I think the chosen people is a small subset. Those tribes um, that descended from the line of Terah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Those simply because of political/religious allegiance. They're not particularly chosen genetically. There's lots of people who are outside that line that were superior beings. You know, um,
Yeah, gotcha. But it's still your premise that the persecution of the Jews and the setting apart of the Jews historically comes from back then in the times when the Anunnaki were still around. I mean, that's the source of that separateness.
That's what I think I don't want to say discovering, but that's where the evidence seems to lead.
Yeah, I mean, it actually it doesn't surprise me. I and it kind of fits together with some of the stuff I've been thinking about, which is why it's interesting that this is today's topic. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, because it's such a persistent human, shall we say, curse, this particular hatred that it got to have very, very early origin. I think the Israelites made it worse for themselves in later times, in the times of Genesis and Exodus, and later, by deprecating, uh, you know, everybody else's religion. And I go into this to some extent, in Evolution Diverted, because since they had decided um, that the 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 old they were divorcing themselves from the olden gods, which was, they were basically trying to bury their history, okay, uh, out of consciousness, And so, in order to do that, they had to deprecate everybody else's gods, the surrounding tribes in Canaan, and later the Greeks and the Romans, Um, uh, um, that is not that. That's a good way to increase people's hatred of you,
Yep.
to deprecate their revered deities.
Yeah, no question. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a good way to do it, and the Jews were adamant about that,
Mm.
and the Romans thought they were insane, to think that the God of the chosen people was going to save them, as they rebelled against the mightiest empire that the world had ever seen, Well, of course, Jerusalem got flattened, you know. Um, um, but the the Hebrews of that time were victims of their own delusion. But the delusion's been maintained.
Mike, acknowledging the history that you've presented, uh, I have to say that there have been other groups that are quite similar. I mean, groups of humans, and with maybe not such a great connection with the Anunnaki. Who knows? And I'm thinking of the Japanese. And there was a movie sometime, back, quite old now. Some European guy a sailor washes ashore on one of the Japanese islands. He lives, and they pick him up and they take him to a village. And then the story develops, and he becomes the last samurai or some kind of weird stuff. It's total fiction. I asked a friend who was pretty conversant with Japanese history and Japanese behavior, historical. And I said, "Is that true? Would that have happened?" He said, "Absolutely not. They would have killed him right on the beach."
Yeah. Um, I think the connection with the world of the Anunnaki, and xenophobia, the hatred of the other. I think the connection is quite real because the Anunnaki colonized around the world. So first Mesopotamia, then Egypt, then India, then China, then Mexico, then the Andes, and all of them brought with them um, the this central tenet of the Anunnaki view of the world, which was you hate the other. You hate the other because the other, worships a different god. He worships a god other than your God, you know. And that's I think that's the source of the hatred of the other all around in civilizations all around the earth. In civilizations, you know, in indigenous um, cultures is very different. You fight another culture because they're taking your land and therefore they're taking the game that you hunt, and they're taking your sources of water. But you don't hate them because they have a different God. Uh, and that's because the indigenous peoples have all the same deity. They all are in awe of the Great Spirit. If you plunge into Huxley's book on the perennial philosophy, he dissects the belief systems of indigenous groups all around the world and demonstrates that they're all the same. They're all the same because they derive from a life in nature, and they derive from a consciousness which is open to an awareness of the field. Um, we can use this to segue into, if we're ready to move on into a little further differentiation of civilization and indigenous life, because we're dying right now, or in danger of dying from an overdose of civilization. Um, in the world of the people of the earth that was lived away from the Anunnaki world. However they got there, escaped, or themselves were less inclined to worship the gods. However they got there, they spread around the world. Okay? Um, and they lived in harmony with nature, with Mother Earth, who provides everything they needed. And they sense their unity with the natural world and with spirit that moves everything and animates everything and animates the self. Um, you know, in their cultures, the tribes do what's best. The decisions are guided by spirit, not by vote. Um, that's what some groups like the Quakers attempt to do today. Um, in a Quaker meeting, a business decision is made um, not by vote, but until everyone in silence sits and waits until the sense of the meeting, which is the connection with what's the best way to proceed, penetrates enough until it's carried along. Now, some could say, well, that's just a manifestation of groupthink, and dismiss it psychologically. Um, but that's not what those who are in that practice um, feel. You know, we are deluding ourselves about that, I don't know. But that is the way a tribal council worked. They didn't raise their hands. They just waited. Until they knew whether or not it was time to move the community to um, for the chief to be replaced or whatever. Um,
Well, I will, in agreement with what you've been saying, I will say that the Japanese society that my friend was referring to was highly authoritarian, highly prescribed rules for everything,
and highly stratified too.
and highly stratified. Yes.
Yeah.
So whether that comes from the Anunnaki or some other source, um, is irrelevant to the situation. Is it what your situation here that you're drawing a steep contrast between those societies that are like that and those societies that are not?
And the societies that are not are basically primitive ones.
The what?
They're primitive. They're living in, they're living in nature and mostly in small groups. Although the principle doesn't have to die out with larger groups. Um,
right.
the it doesn't have to. The Iroquois Federation, the Confederacy, um, that was one of the models for the Constitution of the United States, you know, um, spiritual models and factual ones too, because there were meetings with the tribal chiefs. They were insistent that the great law of peace, which unified the first there were I think four tribes and then there were six um, who had been warring against each other. They were adamant that the great law of peace was divinely inspired, that it came to them. They didn't reason it out. They didn't vote on it. You know, it you might say swept them up. Um, by contrast, you know, um, the humans living in a world ruled by the Anunnaki lords um, were living basically cut off from nature. Cities and highly organized agricultural surrounds, Um, obviously, they had to live by natural law, but it was a pretty structured artificial existence, much like Nibiru, because on Nibiru, for a long time, probably millions of years, the humanoids there had been living in a largely artificial world without energy from the sun, internally generated. Um, Whatever growth was being, vegetation was had artificial lights in order for things to grow. So it was a highly unnatural world, um, one that helped to keep them in their traumatized state. Um, like a, for them, it was kind of natural to reproduce that on Earth. You know, they did not go native, the Anunnaki. Um, So humans got attached to the god of the city, and then later to his representative, the king. Um, and that's where the hatred of the other started, as I said. Um, okay. After the Anunnaki were no longer in power, after they went home, government governance by the king and by the elite, um, and self-governance was tried repeatedly. And it it's frankly it's never worked very well for very long. That's the sobering reality that we're looking at right now. It's never worked. Self-governance, whether it's the king, the elite, the council, uh, the Senate. I'm talking about in ancient times. Um, uh, so representative government via election, that's the great strength, um, of representative government elections, but it's also the greatest vulnerability. For one thing, there's the inherent danger that elections always uh, turn the populace divisive. It's our group versus their group, and who can get more votes together and who can make more votes appear or disappear. So it's the great vulnerability. Um, it is somewhat artificial because it's something of a myth to believe that the the will of the universe, will be manifest through the will of the majority. very iffy proposition. Um, um,
I learned learned recently that Plato thought it was a bad idea, democracy. Did you know that?
yes, um, but he kind of despaired um, because towards the end of the Republic, he said like nothing seems to, it's nothing is without fundamental flaw.
Well, he couldn't come up with something better. That's
No,
true.
no.
And he tried.
I mean, the Republic, was an ideal polis, the ideal, state, and then he went on to describe how, if it were in effect, how it would fall apart,
Hmm.
how it would not persist. You know,
Yep.
there was no way that those in power could not try to pass on power to their offspring. There was no way that they
Right.
could that because that
I
was
think we're seeing that today. I mean, do you see the people in power right now voluntarily letting go of that power? I don't.
right, right, or not passing it on to their offspring, which is
Or
yeah.
whatever.
So um, one of the um, in native culture in this country, in spite of what's been done to them, you know, you can easily find, in the members of the First Nations, um, a wish to help the crazy white guys, you know.
Mm.
Um, uh, and that's, Ryan and I have built that into the movie, that that the utopian, the sequestered utopian communities, um, are living not only with the awareness of the Mesopotamian tale, and the source of civilization's anguish, but they're also living in fairly primitive indigenous style. Okay. Um, the message there being that our salvation, you know, comes will come through living in awareness of spirit, living in awareness of the field, um, and um, and that can only happen if your life is very close to nature. Okay. Um, as I said, the perennial philosophy shows that the belief systems all around the world in primitive peoples are pretty much the same. And yes, it's true that a young brave is taught, the belief system of the tribe. Um, that the tree has a spirit and the bear has a spirit, and and there's a spirit of the east wind and the west wind. Um, but that could not be simply inculcated. It would also have to be absorbed, um, spiritually, essentially absorbed by the developing um, boys and girls. Um, Thomas Paine witnessed that, in colonial times, when not just children, but even adults were captured and adopted by native peoples. Uh, and if they were, quote, freed by being recaptured by colonists, they, as fast as they could, they ran back into the woods to try to, to
Mhm.
find their to find their tribe, to find a better way to live. And he made it, very explicit that they are living better than we are. Their way of life is
Mm,
superior to ours.
mm,
He was very clear. Um,
mm.
I think I may have mentioned this, that some anthropological types, did some calculations for living on the land in North America, uh, and they determined that a tribe could provide for itself for food and shelter and clothing, the essentials, on the basis of approximately 20 hours of effort per adult per week. That's even better than a 32-hour week, which we're not going to see, you know.
Mm.
Um, um, so, in what I try to put together in writing and what we're developing in the movie, um, you know, the question is, is it possible for us to wake up in time, to come out of collective amnesia, you know, um, before it's too late, before um, the planet and the population's in a death spiral, and there's no way to know. We can only do our best. Um, I mean, the fear in that woman, mouthing off behind you, um, in the waiting room, um, and that fear is very, very deep, um, and it, the way that my strategy, you know, me and Ryan and others, um, is to get the necessary information, into the minds in the form of a story, because we can listen to stories, partly because we say, "Oh, it's just a story," you know. Um, and the story can be quite powerful. And it may be um, that a story like this really is a catalyst. Um, it was written somewhere. I don't know if it's an accurate quote, but Lincoln is said to have met Harriet Beecher Stowe, um, and said, "Is this the little woman who started the Great War?" You know, because Uncle Tom's Cabin gave energy to abolitionism that it didn't have before. So maybe the right story right now, um, about the some Anunnaki hybrids having been with us um, all along. That's not entirely untrue, because we've been the hybrids all along. Um, and the return of destructive Enlil, you know, with all his gold, you know, is a pretty good vehicle to talk about the return of destructiveness with all its gold, you know, in certain figures right now. Um, as the ancient Chinese curse has it, we're living in interesting times.
Oh, Mike, if
Yo,
if you have to, if you were to put a number on it or a numerical range, what percentage of humans' social derelictions stem from Anunnaki influence?
Are you asking, are they all that's wrong with us?
you know, I would say over 90%.
For the serious ones.
Yeah. Because if you really get a close look at of truly primitive peoples, ones that have not been influenced even generations back, in the South Pacific or deep in the Amazon jungle, there's really nothing wrong with them.
Well, let's
I
leave
mean,
that alone. Um,
I mean,
we
yeah,
might say there's nothing powerfully wrong with them.
they're living, for the most part, they're living in balance with themselves and with their environment, and to some extent with other tribes.
Well, to
Yeah.
some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I have suspected that the issue is how powerful do you think you are? If you start thinking that you're really pretty damn powerful, then maybe you could risk beating up on other people if you want what they got. But if you figure maybe you're not quite so powerful enough to take that risk, then you're going to put a little time and effort into getting along.
it becomes a matter, Jim, of definition. I can say, well, any culture which exploits within itself, exploits the weaker, any culture, which goes to war with what's perceived to be a less powerful culture, you can say, well, I could say, somebody can say, well, that's just reductive thinking to assign all of that to Anunnaki, the influence of the Anunnaki nobles,
Mm,
um, um, but I think it's more than just language, because traumatization is traumatization. What we can deduce from the scraps of planet interplanetary history that are in the tablets, is that the Anunnaki, the inhabitants of the planet that became Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, had to have been powerfully traumatized
hmm
and re-traumatized every time their world passed through um, the uh, the inner solar system, risking collision, which happened every once in a while. There was a
Yeah.
catastrophic collision. So they were traumatized, they were re-traumatized, they were living in an artificial environment which did not allow them to reconnect with their natural roots, and so they spread the contagion of the culture of a traumatized people,
Mm,
all around the world,
hmm
wherever they could. Um, because it was,
and given that environment of trauma, my imagination uh, indicates that even minor, relatively speaking, minor traumas like like a winter that's too cold or a winter that's too long um, would, for the very vulnerable people of long ago, have been a a nudge on the wheel of trauma to continue it.
Whether someone or culture, stays in an activated state where the threat responses are
Yeah,
highly available,
yeah,
and reproduced. Um, in order to stay that way, they have to have no access to relief and to cure. You know,
hmm
uh, um, um, and the Anunnaki on their world didn't. Okay, something like a devastating winter. If uh, um, if there's a whole series of them, then the tribe is wiped out. But if there aren't that many, then eventually um, the trust in nature is restored. Um, and the traumatized state fades out, has a chance of fading out, because we don't really want to live that way. Not really. Um,
Well, then you're describing a society that was prior to terrible weather. It was not living in a state of trauma.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the one way in which on Turtle Island in North America, the indigenous tribes understood trauma was when the warriors went out to fight a battle for basically for land. And they did horrible things which they wouldn't do in their ordinary life as members of the tribe. But as warriors, they were in a different state and did horrible, crazy things. You know. Then when they came back, they had to be untraumatized. They went through
Yeah,
healing rituals,
yeah,
so that they could become decent to live with again,
yeah.
and wouldn't do at home what they had just done, to the other tribe. You know, we don't seem to do that, do we? Um, we bring home our warriors, and then they live in some form of traumatization the rest of their lives, unless they are very, very fortunate, you know, in the kind of families that they come back to, and the kind of communities they come back to, unless they're fortunate. But those are the exceptions. You know.
So your books and your work, uh, and hopefully the movie, um, will sponsor the question in the audiences: does it have to be like this? And the answer is no, not necessarily. We were basically induced or taught or led to this uh, willingness to live in a state of trauma. And
Yes,
and does it have to be like that? Is the question at hand. Is, is that is that what you
it's
have in mind?
yes, it's in us, but it's not our essence. It is in us, but it's not who we really are.
Yeah. So the answer would be no, it doesn't have to be like this.
Right, right. And for the most part, well, I'll put it this way. Our ideal is let me back up a bit. The Anunnaki, their world, they were adapted to traumatization. They didn't want to get out of it. They had lost their interest in living any other way.
No.
Um, it's remarkable that in all of the literature, the Anunnaki dominated literature of the Middle East. It's also true, not just Mesopotamia, but Egypt, um, with all of the forever war, there's never any articulation of a wish for anything else,
Hmm.
regret that we're living this way, or that there's anything wrong with it. You know, it's the way we are, and that's the way life is. You know, um, and um, but you're absolutely right. It doesn't the message is it doesn't have to be this way, and what can we do about it? What can we
Yeah.
do? Well, for me, it's great fun getting together with you all. I think it's going to be every couple of months. That's how long it takes for enough new stuff like these columns under the pyramids, um, uh, new things to appear. And who knows, in 2 months, there may be some dramatic uh, information coming from Three Eye Atlas. You know, I mean, there's what a perfect example we have of the ability to ignore and deny obvious reality that's too difficult because you know the number of anomalies in this object which is racing through the solar system right now, there's so many that it's clearly not a natural object. It's not a comet. It's not an asteroid. You know, what is it and why is it here? And it may disappear before we get any answers, but we may get some rather dramatic answers. Um, but the most impressive thing about it right now is how thoroughly almost the entire scientific community um, is making it a non-issue. Because it's enormous and it's all wrong. There's so much about it that's all wrong. Um,
What do you think it is?
I have no idea. Uh, um, I mean, it's an artifact it's made by somebody somewhere.
You
But
think
for
it's
what?
me? You think it's because I mean I think I kind of I follow Avi Loeb. You and I've talked about this before, and I think that he's being he's really showing the right level of academic caution. And what he says is we find all these anomalies, but they're anomalies based on a database that only considers stuff in our solar system. And so this is the first time we've really dealt with a set of objects that we're pretty sure are coming from outside. And he's got this list of 15 things that make it not look like a solar system comet, but that doesn't mean that it's not natural
Oh,
because
I see.
we're dealing
I
with
see.
the rest of the universe here. And I kind of think I'm starting to watch this and I'm starting to think we're not even thinking about the right stuff. I think any civilization that wanted to get more information from out there, we should be hooking onto these things. I mean, this is the third one that's come through here in like 6 years or something like that. So we can assume there are going to be more. Why not try to figure out how to attach sensors to them so that they're I mean, I just think that whatever these things are, if they're going as fast as they are, I think we need to look closely at them because if I'm thinking like this, other people have thought like this, And I think we might find signatures of other civilizations just by getting close enough to these things to study them. I mean, I think there's so many cool things about this. I'm
You
very
mean we should be prepared for the next one?
We should be preparing for the next one. And we should be saying, how can we intercept it and have our interception not get squashed by the speed? I mean, and stuff like that. There must be ways to do that where you can land on a thing that's going that fast and then walk around and see who else has landed on it. I mean, the thing is kilometers long. And I'm thinking that if this stuff is normal, traveling around the universe that fast, then why not start thinking about how do we take advantage of them? How do we use them to give us, because I've also been thinking, if I wanted to build something to travel to the next solar system, I wouldn't start at the bottom of gravity well. I mean, it makes sense. Why not start with an asteroid and hollow it out and stuff like, I mean, for all we know, this really is a ship, but it could be so many more things too. And even if only to study it better. I mean, just the fact that there are things coming through our solar system that are moving that fast makes me want to hitch a ride.
You think it makes more sense to investigate technology to get something up to that speed that makes more sense than colonizing Mars?
Oh,
That was
absolutely.
that was
Colonizing
a
Mars.
joke. That was a joke.
Yes, yes, colonizing Mars. Although I will make one caveat there. If the colonizer is Elon Musk, I say go for it. Just so you know.
Him and his followers. Huh? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all of them.
Him and his follower. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, well, it'll be gone before we know it, very likely. Be fascinating if we learn something from it before it goes.
Yeah.
Um, and if not, once out of sight, it'll be out of mind, Linda. You know, nobody will do anything to prepare a craft to attain that velocity.
Well, do you have to go that fast, or can't you just kind of come in at an angle? I don't know. I don't know how I can't imagine things that well, but it seems to me like there ought to be a way to land on
No,
it.
you'd have to match its velocity pretty closely.
We've landed on other things. So.
They won't go anywhere near that fast.
Mm.
Um, and we did land on them by matching their velocity.
Yeah,
Oh, you know,
probably right.
yeah. Um, but there may be some wake up,
Mhm.
there could well be, you know. Um, but you're raising the possibility um, that other star systems are somewhat different, and that this may be a natural or semi-natural object in another star system.
Yeah.
Um, I'm that's logically that's got to be a possibility. I'm inclined to think that most star systems in this galaxy are pretty much variants on ours that are not that different, but the physics is pretty much the same. The chemistry is not that much different, but I don't know. That's my prejudice.
Do you think that NASA or anybody else is hiding stuff from us?
You mean the ET stuff and UFO stuff?
No,
Um,
I'm actually talking about 3I Atlas specifically.
oh, on this. Um, I'm not inclined to think so. Uh, um, why,
Yeah, I don't think I don't think lack of imagination is the same as lying.
Yeah.
So I'm inclined to think no, they're just it's just a characteristic of academic science that it requires consensus, and you're not going to get consensus on something weird for a while. So it's just going to take some time.
Yeah, yeah. Um, the I heard a talk was it was an interesting talk from a recovering alcoholic priest at an AA meeting, and it was talking about beliefs, And he says, well, someone dies, and then about a week later, their beliefs die. And so they are persistent and we defend them enormously, and when they are challenged, that produces, the neurologic wired in response of shame. It's very unpleasant to have the belief that you are invested in, that you take pleasure in contemplating, that you have an interest in propagating, when that's interfered with by some inconvenient, fact, that hurts, literally. It hurts, Um, and we got to find some way to, people generally, find some way to protect against that hurt. And denial and avoidance is a big one, you know attack the other is another big one. That's you know, the attack, the persecution of the one who's, proposing this outrageous, inconvenient information. You know, those are the two favorite ones. Um, Denial and attack other. Another close, riding close behind is withdrawal. You just, not going to think about it. It's not my issue. My specialty is over here. I'm at a voice. Um, if there's some big news that comes in, January, early February, or in this month we can meet in a month, but let's plan on having another powwow in early March. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right.
Stay tuned.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you all. Grieve, we'll be talking soon.
Yeah, thank you all too. I appreciate it tonight very much. Good deal. Good deal. Is it
Okay.
taped? Do you know? I have a friend who was supposed to come and visit with me and see, and she couldn't show up. Is it
Yes, I can
available?
stop. I'm going to stop the recording, and Sandy, my helper, will hopefully post this to the website in a few days, and also on YouTube. I think I've got a channel on YouTube. They keep telling me that I get watchers, so you could try my name, but there are other people, but others who share the same name. I'm not sure how hard it is but you can always go under something like Mesopotamian Tale, and you'll get to that channel, and it'll be there also. On the website, it's under the pull down for events, and you'll have actually all of the recorded forums are there. So for eternity. Okay. See you
Thanks.
soon. Be well. Stay warm.